I am Ken Mettler, and I approve this message.
You're tuned to KZGN-TV with a chat with Ken Mettler. Ken, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you.
And so now I wanted to just start off by talking to you about some of your activities, and you have been very involved in politics. And one that jumps out at me is Proposition 8. So what got you involved in that?
Well, I have been involved as a volunteer and as a conservative activist ever since I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And so I've always been a volunteer. I've always registered people to vote, but I've always paid attention to current events, and I've always been right on top of it and studying public policy. And then you asked about Prop 8.
Right.
Well, Proposition 8 was to define marriage between one man and one woman, and so I became one of the spokesmen for that proposition here in Kern County and got quite active. And through our efforts, Kern County had the highest yes vote on Prop 8 out of the whole state. Out of 58 counties, we were at 75% approval for yes for defining marriage. And we did what is allowed under our state constitution, and we made our voices heard and amended our state constitution. However, it was overturned later by an overreaching court system, and that's a whole nother issue.
Well, we voted on it twice or three times? Twice.
Twice, yes.
Twice.
We had Prop 22 prior. Same thing, it overwhelmingly passed in the state. And then we actually amended our constitution with Prop 8, a further step. But then the rest here was an overreaching federal court system that really should not have been involved. We had the court system legislate from the bench, and that's one of the problems we have in our country right now. Folks are not following the Constitution, and I am a principled constitutionalist. I'm a conservative Republican, and so I like to...
And you've been working the system for quite some time.
Yes, I have. I've been trying to always educate folks and transmit to them my love of the Constitution and what a brilliant document it is. And I think most of our elected officials don't know the first thing about the Constitution, and they're not following it. And that's probably what brings us here today, why I'm sitting here with you.
Tell me about your efforts on Proposition 174, the school voucher initiative.
That was many, many years ago. Here again, 174 was to allow, in the education arena, was to allow the private voucher system. So parents would have the choice of where their children went to school, whether they went to public school or they could use this voucher and go to private school, to create some competition within the education system so parents aren't stuck in underperforming public schools, and to create some competition. Here again, I did that on my own time. I was a volunteer.
And on the school board trustee, I see also?
Yes, I served on a couple different school boards. I've served in the Rosedale School Board in Rosedale in Bakersfield, 12 years, and then I also was elected to the high school board, 38,000 kids, and got a lot of reforms done.
So with all of your political efforts, then you you mentioned that you were a firm believer in term limits. So is this why you have reached this point where you're wanting to run for this 23rd district congressional seat?
Well, I thought it was very important that the people have a choice. It didn't look like anybody was going to run for the congressional seat, and I think we have folks that have been in office for basically their full life. I think it's very unhealthy for our democracy that we have career politicians. I think the founding fathers intended that, frankly, that people would have their business or their farm or their trade. They would go serve for a period of time and then come back to their business, their civilian life. They wouldn't have a gold-plated retirement at the cost of the taxpayers. They would serve, be reasonably compensated, but then come back to their main business, whatever that may be. We now have a whole class of people, of consultants and politicians that are in cahoots with the media, for example, and they stay in there for their whole life, and they're never really accountable, and they never have to live under the rules that they enact on the rest of us. So term limits, in my case, I would advocate for that. It might be very hard to truly achieve it because a constitutional amendment or a convention of the states would be perhaps required. But as politicians go, anybody that says they want to do public service, they can self-term themselves out, and I would do that. I would serve a period of time, and then I would say, that's it, I've accomplished something. Now I'm going back to home building, is what I do for a living, and I would go back to that and let some other young person perhaps come along with lots of energy and new ideas and get that fresh blood in the system. And right now, it's not happening, and it is one of my motivations. I wanted to make sure that folks have a choice and can stand up. The existing politicians need to defend their voting record and their actions, and unless someone runs against them, they're never challenged, and they're never forced to explain why they voted the way they did or what is their record. That's why I'm doing it.
Why do you think some of our representatives have voted in ways that are so contrary to what our expectations have been, or what has led you in that?
Well, I think we've seen it repeatedly, and now with the advent of social media, people are getting more information. For example, shows like yours here, there's more variety of programming. We're not dependent just on 3 networks to tell us what the news is. We're able to go to multiple sources and get information. So I think the voting public is now getting a little more aware of what is happening back in Washington. And I think most people, if they really look at the record, if they go to the sources of information, and like I have a website, kenmettler.com. If folks go there, they'll see the voting record of our incumbent congressman. Kevin McCarthy's record, I disagree with vehemently. I think he's had some horrible votes, and they do not represent the value system nor the fiscal sense of the people in the 23rd District.
What are some of the things he's voted that you feel you would have voted differently?
Well, there's a lot, but the primary one that really set me off and got me really motivated was the omnibus bill at the end of 2015. That was egregious. Mr. McCarthy is not only, he's a congressman, but he's the leader, he's the majority leader of the Republican House. And so he has a higher responsibility. Well, he actually led the vote, voted against 95 of his fellow Republicans, joined up with the Democrats to pass this debt-ridden omnibus spending bill.
Well, what was the option to that? I mean, what could they have done otherwise? Would that have shut the government down if they hadn't voted for that, or what was their option?
That's the argument they've given us and what the mainstream media has said. In reality, though, spending bills like that are huge. They're primarily written by lobbyists. They put their pork-laden items in there. And that bill was 2,000 pages long, had 1,000 pages of footnotes. Mr. McCarthy gave that to his fellow congressmen 72 hours before they had to vote on it. They couldn't read it. They didn't know what was in there. And that's wrong.
I think the only one who said he struggled to read it was Rand Paul.
Well, and Rand Paul is a patriot, and Rand Paul did what was right, and Rand Paul's a very, very smart man. He's probably the only one, I think, that actually took the time to truly try to go through that and read it in such a short period of time. We should not have omnibus spending bills. They should be broken up into 12 appropriations bills, each one separately considered, separately debated. They need to stand on their own. And this thing about shutting down the government is really a misnomer. The portion of government that would be shut down is minuscule. I don't think most people would even notice there was any of that discretionary spending that was being shut off for a while. But nonetheless, to do what's right for the country, to get the balance of power correct between the executive and the judiciary and the legislature has to do their job. They have to legislate. And not only that, the House has the power of the purse, one of the strongest powers given to it by the Constitution. So if they don't exercise their constitutional rights and power of the purse, in other words, all appropriations bills originate in the House, spending bills, for example, they have the ultimate power, because just because Obama wants to do something, if he doesn't have the money to do that executive action, he can't do it. So
Right.
they have a lot of power. They have not been exercising it. And in that omnibus bill, not only did Congressman McCarthy go against his fellow Republicans and join with the Democrats, he gave Obama $50 billion more than he even requested. And we have a tremendous debt in this country. It's unsustainable. And our children, our grandchildren, are going to be paying this debt for generations. It's a huge problem. You mentioned Rand Paul. He has been, and his father have been pointing this out to us,
Right.
that it is a problem, but it is a big problem. It's affecting everything. It's going to affect our Defense Department also, because there's not going to be the funding there. And so it's a big deal. So you asked what's the most egregious? It was the omnibus bill.
Okay.
Now beyond that, what it funded was some fundamental principles that are so against conservatives and the Republican Party. It just is amazing. For example, it fully funded Obamacare. Well, the party's against Obamacare,
Right.
and I would venture most of the people in Kern County and in the rest of the 23rd District are against Obamacare. They don't think that's a role for the federal government, but it fully funded Obamacare. It fully funded Planned Parenthood also, and it fully funded sanctuary cities. Now those are items that could have been carved out of this omnibus bill, but it was all lumped in there, take it or leave it. They got a few good things in there, but overall it was horrible legislation. It should not have been passed, and our congressman was the leader in that effort.
Yeah, and we were, I think, told last spring by his office that that would be to wait until December for Obamacare to be repealed, and then here it was put through.
Well, they did the exact opposite. They not only didn't deal with it in reconciliation, which is a procedure after the bill, they talked that up also. That didn't happen. And we were told and this isn't the first time, this has happened a couple times, but this is the most recent, most public effort like this. What happens is when we have our majority, we gave them the majority, we gave them the House, we gave the Republican Party the majority, through efforts of the Tea Party and conservatives and people getting energized and wanting to do what's right, we gave them the Senate, got a majority. Now, they can't do anything either because they have to have the presidency.
Right.
Well, come on, guys. You have the power of the purse. Do your job. Don't keep taking money from Goldman Sachs, as Mr. McCarthy has done. He's taken close to $200,000 from Goldman Sachs over the years. Do what's right for your constituents here, right here in Ridgecrest. Do what is in their value system, what they've asked you to do, and who you're supposed to be representing. But instead has gone back to Congress, so out of touch with the district, and is doing actions that really weaken the defense industry, weaken our national defense, and we're at a turning point in our country. So me as a volunteer, just a guy, just a citizen, I'm a home builder, I'm also been a petroleum landman, and I'm thinking about my kids' future, and when I saw no one was going to step into the race, I stepped in at the last minute.
Right, you sure did. You
Yeah,
said,
it was
how many
not
signatures did you have to get to?
Well, what happened was on a Tuesday, finally before the deadline, it didn't look like anybody was going to step up, and so some friends asked me to please run, and I said, okay, I'll take one for the team. I'll go up and file. So I did, and I think it was some Tea Party folks were most of our volunteers. We had some other volunteers, but most of them were from the Tea Party. And they said, we'll go gather your signatures so you don't have to think about that. It was very gratifying. They went out and got 4 times as many signatures as was required in one day. And we turned everything in on Thursday before the Friday deadline.
The last deadline.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you though, when you're in a situation, have you been in a situation where, you've wanted to take the lead and move it a direction, and yet your team players are not going that direction? So, you could find yourself in a situation where you're you're you know, tied by your teammates to not do what you set out to do. What are you going to do in that situation?
Well, in my life, I've always been a self-employed businessman, and I'm used to making decisions.
Okay.
And I've always had the ability to swim upstream. I'm the kind of person I'm in this race because of principles.
Okay.
I don't need a job. I don't want a retirement from the taxpayers. That is not my motivation. So when you go in with conviction, it's amazing what people, like-minded people, patriots, can accomplish. And I'll point to the Freedom Caucus in Congress. There's 40 dedicated patriots there. They're changing the role of Congress to the better. I would join the Freedom Caucus the first day I was in office.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm a patriot. I love my country. I could care less about the cronies. I could care less about some international businessman and his money, because I think it's corrupting. I think it makes bad decisions. It doesn't do what's best for this country. And I'm a pretty stubborn German guy who's worked hard, and I'm not, I'd rather die poor with honor.
Yes.
Then I would rather die a rich man who can't look at himself in the mirror.
So anybody there, I mean, they all have their vote, just like we get to vote come our election day. So your vote is your vote, and you're going to stick to
Well, I'm going to stick to it, but I'm a pretty good strategist, too.
Okay.
I mean, I'm the kind of guy that will build coalitions. I'll tell you, force of personality and conviction can overcome a lot. We are a nation of ideas. Our founding fathers were told they were crazy to go against the British Empire, the most powerful military force in the world. I can imagine what Martha Washington said to George. Are you crazy, George? What are you doing? Without the help of the French, they probably would have lost. But think in their shoes, they had everything to lose, their lives, everything they'd earned. Their farms could be burned down. They didn't have insurance. There was no safety net for these people. So as a citizen, if all I have to worry about is a little bit of inconvenience, taking some time and putting my hat in the ring to run for office, that's the least I can do in honor of our founding fathers and this beautiful Constitution they gave us. We should honor it and remember what the sacrifices were made, and I will never do anything that dishonors their sacrifices.
Let's get a little bit in on some of your principles that you stand for, that you were talking about.
Sure. Well, you know, I also was president of another volunteer group in the state. It's called the California Republican Assembly.
Okay.
Statewide group.
Oh, right,
and that is the group that got Ronald Reagan to start. Okay. It is a fiscal and social conservative organization that tries to keep the Republican Party true to its principles. And in fact, Ronald Reagan said we were the group that was the conscience of the Republican Party. So my peers elected me as president. You don't just get to become president of that organization unless you're respected by conservative activists up and down the state. So they had seen me you know, do actions that were probably to my personal detriment, you know, not good for business. Probably took a lot of time away from my family, and I had to travel, but I was committed to doing the right thing. And so I moved forward, and those kind of core things like that are kind of imbued in me.
How did your upbringing influence your values and principles?
Well, I grew up in a very modest working class environment. I was born in Taft, California, you know. Actually even grew up in the suburbs of Taft. I call it Ford City. It's a little tiny speck out in the oil patch. And my father was a farmer for a while, a couple bad years farming after World War II. Then went to work for Standard Oil. He was a gas plant operator. My mom was a homemaker. And I had very engaged grandparents who I hung out with all the time. And my friends always say I was kind of born as a young adult, you know, because I loved to read, you know. And had a great childhood. We lived in Bakersfield most of my childhood, went through the public schools, and then went away to college. And then I got a master's degree in public administration, ultimately. I wanted to be a city manager at that time as a young man, you know. But I went off to Central America, went to Nicaragua, and I actually had a stint with the Peace Corps down there. And I was analyzing earthquake-damaged buildings attached. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
They had a devastating earthquake,
Right.
and I spent a year cataloging damaged buildings and coming up with budgets how to repair these buildings. I was 21 years old and had a blast. But I also was privy to seeing the communists come in, and frankly, we had to leave the country because the Sandinistas had entered the country, supported by Castro. And I had, interestingly, had tried to start a small little cattle herd with a Nicaraguan partner, and the communists were going around in pickups with machine guns and killing all the livestock. So in a third world country, you destroy the economy when you do that, because so much wealth is tied up in livestock, and there's no insurance or anything. So my life savings, which wasn't much, as a 21-year-old, but I had that in country to go out and buy heifers, start this cattle herd, and I hadn't spent it yet. So they told us we had to get out in 24 hours. We had to get out and get our gear together and leave the country. But it was very interesting. I got to see some international politics up close as a very young person.
Yeah, it
was very interesting.
Was there a language barrier there with all that?
Yes, there was. I had to learn some Spanish very rapidly. Yes, and in school I'd taken Russian, and then my dad spoke German. He was a German interpreter in the war, so I'd never had Spanish before. So I had to kind of.
But you like languages.
Well, a little bit. I'm not very good, but I can get along.
Yeah, apparently so. So now you were talking about. Tell us about your wife and your family. Your immediate family.
Sure. My wife is Barbara, and my children. I have two boys. They're a little older now. One is 19, the youngest, and the other one is 26. Good boys, and we've gone through all the trials and tribulations of raising two boys. It hasn't been smooth sailing, but they're getting the wildness out of their system, and I hope they'll settle down at some point here. But I can relate. I mean, I wasn't an angel growing up, and you have to do all those things and learn the hard way. But no, we live also in Bakersfield, and my wife works as a substitute teacher, and she likes it a lot. And we have a little grandchild that is at our house all the time. He's 2 years old, and we have just a wonderful time.
Boy, I would love to talk to you some more. You were talking about some of the things you mentioned about cronyism and issues in the house, and I thought, well, you've heard of the Harvard survey that was done, where so many of the students were more for socialism than they were for capitalism, but a lot of their issues were with the cronyism and things that have just turned people off so much, and from their perspective, capitalism is a lot the problem. So I think from a lot of things you've said today, they might be encouraged to go to the polls and see some people that want to affect some of those.
Well, that's a very good point. I kind of tell people on the local level, I'm kind of the Bernie Sanders for the Constitution and for free enterprise, free markets, constitutionally limited government. When you explain the Constitution to young people, they get inspired. And I think the Republican Party has done a horrible, horrible job of telling people what we stand for. And if we keep going down the path we're going, the Republican Party will become the Whig Party. It will be not a factor. People are attracted to candidates like Bernie Sanders, because they look at Hillary as corrupt. They look at Bernie, that old curmudgeon, as at least he's principled, even though I diametrically oppose what he's standing for. I mean, communism, socialism are not good things, and we've seen horrible atrocities over history with communist dictatorships, for example. But we don't have the counterbalance on the other side of the spectrum that says, hold it, we have a beautiful document here. Let's talk about the Constitution. If we follow that, everybody does better. One of my platforms is equal opportunity for all. It doesn't mean an equal guarantee, But a lot of people feel like they're so disenfranchised, they don't even have a shot. And we have a middle class and a working class that's being decimated in this country. We have some very few people getting very, very wealthy. We have a middle class that's being destroyed. And it's making everybody basically impoverished and dependent. And so we need a vigorous middle class. We need to make sure that small businesses, the engine that hires a lot of people, is vibrant. And part of that is that we got to get the federal government out of interfering in everything. We need to get government as close to the people as we can at the state level and then the local level. And we can't have the American taxpayer, each one of us owing $160,000 of the federal debt. And that's what happened with that omnibus bill, by the way. Our country is in debt over $19 trillion, and it does not include $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities. We are paying so much of this debt, the interest on that debt, and I may have mentioned this already, the interest on that debt is going to exceed the entire budget for the Defense Department in 8 years. So how can we have a vibrant Defense Department when we're paying all this interest money, and a lot of it goes off the Chinese bondholders? The Chinese are taking that money and they are putting it into technology for their military, and they are moving leaps and bounds ahead of us in technology. They're getting new aircraft. They have a glider that comes in at 4,000 to 7,000 miles per second from outer space and can deliver nuclear weapons. Our missile defense shields right now cannot handle that kind of threat. So that is why we can't have congressmen that are voting for this debt, funding these things they shouldn't be at the federal level, and then turn around and ask our diminished armed services to protect this country, because we're at the lowest level since World War II, and we're getting dangerously low. The Navy right now, I think it only has 240 ships deployed, and we need at least another 100 ships to handle the threats that are out there before us. And we need new aircraft on those ships too to handle the fleet operations, and it's not happening. We've got some old technology, and we have a country that cannot or is unwilling to fund a proper military budget because we have so much money going off to social welfare and not very efficiently used.
Well, in our less than 1 minute left
Oh my
here,
goodness.
what haven't I asked, or what would you like to elaborate on, or what do you? I didn't ask you about your presidential candidate choice.
Yes.
You gonna
well,
support,
we could kind of, the decision seems to have been made because we've got it. I think the nominee is going to be Donald Trump.
Yes.
I thoroughly support Donald Trump.
Okay.
He's not the perfect candidate, but he is going to be our candidate. We do need to beat these liberals that are destroying this country. I would almost like to see a Trump Cruz ticket. I mean, that would be a blending of a constitutional intellectual and Cruz, a social conservative, with Donald Trump, who does have the businessman aspect, and he understands that we are being destroyed by some of the trade deals that we've entered. The Chinese manipulate their currency, and they're wiping us out. So I like Donald Trump.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much.
Sure.
It's been very interesting to get to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
I am Ken Mettler, and I approve this message.